Hello everybody, how are we doing today? My name is Stacy Smyer. I'm here to show you how to edit drums in Studio One with a Beat Detective style workflow. Let's get started. Alright, so there are many things that go into working in a Beat Detective type of workflow. You get used to them as they go along, but there are a few key things that I think are essential in a Studio One workflow and much of any of the other ones. So the first thing that really comes down to is layering or creating playlists. I think it is very important because I always like to have a way that I can go back and check my work or fix anything if I screwed up. The way that I would start to do that in Studio One is by grouping everything together, and so I'm going to do that by just selecting all of our tracks here and hitting Shift Command G. I have that set up as my grouping key command, and I also have one to disable it for Shift Command U to dissolve that specific group. The reason that I have it set up that way and I'm not renaming them and doing a bunch of mini dives with everything is because I'm going to be enabling and disabling these groups very frequently, and I personally view it as too much time to go through and have to deselect it. They don't have it as a standard pop-up kind of thing on the left as you do in Pro Tools. You do have a way to get to it, but it's a little bit clunky and I can't get there directly from the event window. So I just kind of bypass it and I just disabled the groups. So now that we have everything grouped together, we're going to make that layer. So we're going to pull up our inspector window, and we're also going to select all of these tracks. If there's only one highlighted, even though everything is grouped, it is going to only affect that one track, so do watch out for that. So we're going to pull up this inspector window. The first thing we are going to do once we get in here is disable this layers follow events. Essentially what that does is it makes all of the layers do the exact same thing, which I'm sure Presonus has a reason for including, but I personally don't believe it to be a necessary function and a good part of this workflow. So we're going to disable that, and then I like to go in and immediately rename my base layer as track. You can name it whatever you'd like or nothing at all. And I'm going to duplicate that. So what duplicating it does is create a new track within that same one that is a duplicate portion of the audio. But since we disabled the layers follow events, if I move the new one that we made, it's not going to affect the old one. But if I keep that in place, it is going to affect the old one, and we don't want that. We want this to act as a control and a fail-safe in case we screw anything up. So I'm going to get rid of seeing the old layer by right-clicking and hit Expand Layers. And I'm going to rename this one Edit. And we'll get rid of the inspector window. We don't have to worry about that for a good chunk of time here. The next thing that we are going to want to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to take the first hit that we have of a specific section and move it to the grid point and the first little downbeat here. And I like to do that by going in on the sample level. I could use tab to transient, but I want it to be very exact. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to split that right there with everything grouped still. And I'm going to delete everything that was to the left of that that's just kind of wasted space. If we need it later, we will pull it back. So I pulled us out of the grid or the toggle snap mode using a key command for this one right here. Essentially what this is doing is either letting these events snap right to that grid point or to move freely around the page. And I have that key command set to Shift Option T. So I want it re-enabled now so that I can pull this back to that downbeat. And now we can begin to plot our audio bin markers. Audio bin markers are the detection points in which the Beat Detective algorithm will base all of its editing around. And so we do need to go ahead and take a listen here in just a second, but what we are listening for are the main parts that we are going to want to affect everything else in relation to. So I would imagine it's going to be our kick, snare, and our toms, and if it were a very open cymbal kind of part, we'd probably worry about those two, but at the moment I'm not currently too concerned with them. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what we have here. Turn on the metronome and see how much work that this needs. Alright, as you can hear, the playing isn't horrible, but it's not great by any means either, and it definitely needs some touching up. So to start doing that, again, since we have our new layer created and we can do whatever we want with this one without affecting the one previously, I'm going to dissolve our group using Shift Command U. And I'm going to start to open the audio bin window. Now the audio bin window can be used for a couple different things, and this is everything basically to this side is the Beat Detective portion of it. There's no real name for it within the audio bin window, it's just part of its functionality. So we want to make sure that we are in the standard detection mode. We'll hit Analyze. And one thing to note is that whenever we move something to this downbeat, and this is the whole purpose of why I do it, it's going to put all these little mistriggered audio bins, and we don't want to worry about those. We want to have that be our basis that we start from. So I'm just going to get rid of these two. And the way that you do that is by holding down Option and Command and hovering above the top half of whatever specific track. And then we can just drag and then delete. If we want to add points, I have it set where my main cursor, its secondary function is the bend tool. I have this globally set and I use it all the time. It's not very often that I use much of any of the other built-in functions for the cursor. In order to access that, you just hold down Command, and then you can use this like a normal cursor and just plot points and get rid of them if you need to. But let's go through now and check that it accounted for all of the bass drum hits and it's not triggering off of any bleed. All right, and we can see that it's triggering off of one bleed hit here, and also that there's this little one that's just right on the very end. It is very important to get rid of these whenever you see them, and you will see them whenever you analyze any track. They just seem to come up. And we want to just get rid of those. The main reason we want to get rid of the one at the end is because it'll do a whole bunch of mistriggering, and it'll make your fading in the end a lot more confusing and make a whole bunch of minute clips that you really don't want. So we'll go ahead and do the little safety ones on the beginning and end. And we're going to repeat the process with the snare here. Go ahead and just for fun delete anything if it were there. Very quickly go through and see that it's catching all these hit points and that it's getting these quieter notes. Now on this little snare roll, I can see that it is still catching the snare hit, but it's not doing it quite exactly where I want it to. I want it to be at the 0 point crossing of that specific hit. So I'm going to delete that one, and I'm going to come in a little closer myself by eye and put it down right there. And it looks like it's doing the same thing for this one. I'm going to go in and do that same thing. All right, awesome. And let's do that for the end. We're going to skip tom 1, go straight to tom 2, because these are all just bleed hits. Analyze. And we can see that we have a whole bunch of snare bleed going on earlier in the track, and it is taking audio bin markers off of that. So I'm just going to go in and quickly just get rid of all of them at one time. And do the same with the end there. We'll repeat the process for tom 3 and then tom 5 here in just a moment. And it doesn't look like we have a whole lot to worry about with this one other than this straggler at the end. Alright, so again, we only wanted to worry about the kick, snare, and the 3 toms in this instance. So now that we have everything set, we are going to regroup everything, again using Shift-Command-G, just hitting enter, not worrying about the name or doing anything like that. And we're going to come over to this track section. This essentially is what very specifically is going to be input into the beat detective type of algorithm, and it's going to and it has to be done within grouping, and it's going to immediately recognize this new group that we made. If for whatever reason you don't like dissolving groups and doing things like that, you can always just reselect whichever group, but just make sure that these tracks are enabled to that group. So we want our time stretch to be set to drums, and this is probably the most important section of everything here. This is the guides section. Even though we only took care of the audio bin markers in these 5 specific tracks, if we didn't input these correctly, it'll go off of the preset ones that are in all of the tracks and just it'll be all over the place. We want to avoid that. We want to tell it very specifically what to do because we took the time to make it specific. So the way that I work with it is I usually go through and I disable all of them just as a safety net. And then I re-enable the kick in, the snare top, and in this case, tom 2, 3, and 5, and then double check that none of the other ones are marked. We can get rid of that window. And again, let's just make sure that everything is selected here and not just a singular one. We want our actions set to slice. We want our auto fades turned on and to about 10 milliseconds. You could use a longer or a shorter one, but 10 milliseconds seems to be one that works well for editing drums. We want our autofill on, but our merge off. If we leave the merge on, it is going to bounce whatever file that we have here, and we don't want that. We want to do all of our edits together for the rest of the song. And also, if anything's screwed up, I would want to be able to move it independently and not have to go back and then rebounce everything. So then we move down to quantize. I personally like that to be set to 100%. If you want more of a natural kind of feel, then you're more than welcome to lower that value, but that is purely up to you. Once we have all of this set, we are finally ready to hit apply and have the algorithm do its magic. So, and hit apply. It'll take a second. And as you can see, it took all those individual audio bend points and it made an edit based on those. And so the autofilling was it slicing it right here and then pulling the length back that was needed to make up for that clip being moved and then fading it in 10 milliseconds. So if you're used to coming from Pro Tools, you will have, or you might remember that they have a trigger pad option. And essentially what that does is it gives a default value that you can move these fades back. Now, Studio One does not offer one like that yet. I would hope that they would add that as an update in the future. But a poor man's workaround for that is to make sure that all of these clips are selected here. And then we are going to pull each side of the fade back. Unfortunately, we can't just move all of these like this and have it work. We have to pull the sides of the fades for whatever reason. So we'll pull it out and about there. And I personally don't like working like this. It's not very consistent, and the algorithm already does a pretty good job of accounting for the initial transient space. So I, again, tend to not really worry about it. So now that we have this all edited, let's go ahead and take a listen. All right, and it sounds like it fixed our issue. Let's go ahead and compare back to the original. And I think that sounds great, and it did exactly what we needed it to do. All right, so let's say in theory that I had edited all of the song here. We had everything done from start to finish. I did everything in their own sections, and we were ready to go with consolidating these files. What I would do is I would leave all of these edits as they are in one layer, and I'm going to duplicate that same one and get rid of seeing it. And I'm going to name this one comp. If you had another step you wanted to do, then name it whatever that is, or again, don't name it anything at all. It is up to you. And I want to highlight all of these, and I want them to bounce together as one file. But one important distinction is I want them to start now at the very beginning of the song. And I also forgot to do this earlier, my apologies. I need to make a little bit of lead-in space so that it doesn't go from absolute silence to full-on audio. We want it to have a little bit of ramp-up time with some just background noise. Though very small, it does make a difference, and you can also get clicks and pops if you don't do that. So I'm going to come in with everything grouped still, our new layer made. I'm going to highlight everything, but I'm not going to do it with just the standard cursor. I'm going to make sure to do it with our plus cursor, because what this does is it takes the current region and it'll also add time to it. And we only have to worry about just selecting one, because with everything grouped, it's going to repeat that action to all of the other tracks in that group. So this is the amount of time I want to add. I'm not necessarily concerned about everything on the end, but more so the very beginning. I can always chop off time. So I have my bounce key command set to Shift Option 3, and that'll go ahead and bounce all of our tracks together. All right, now it looks like all of our drum tracks are consolidated and ready to go. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.
How you made me